Okay, there we go. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Okay, hi everyone. Can I have your attention? We do want to start. Good early evening. Welcome to our event, Pakistan, Class, State, and Politics. So the event is being live streamed right now. We'll be taking questions online, and like before I actually jump into everything, we are live tweeting as well with hashtag PDF Pakistan, so people can follow online. My name is Ruj. I am part of the Pakistan Development Fund. We're an organization that likes to promote learning, inclusive learning, and awareness about issues that are going on within Pakistan and those that affect the diaspora here. We're very lucky to have Naman come in today. Before we hand it off to Naman, I'm going to introduce Mariam, who's our moderator for today, and will tell us what our topic is about. Mariam?
Hi everyone. Sorry for the delay. Welcome to the first event this month. I'm going to briefly introduce Naman, and then afterwards we'll have some type of discussion. So, for the description about the event, basically, the British culture of Pakistan is often obscured by narratives of terrorism and war. Yet, the ways in which constellations and the structure, the ways in which constellations and the structuring relations of power are key to understanding the ways in which it's done or it doesn't get done in Pakistan. Naman recently spent some time in Pakistan, and we hope that he will share some of his reflections on class-based politics. He is currently a writer and organizer with Basic Community Service and is engaged in service and security.
Everybody kind of hear me? I haven't eaten anything since obvious reasons. So we're in the same boat. Oh, there you go. My name is Naman. First, I want to thank PDF for organizing this. They say they're really lucky to have me, but really it was just like I got off the plane, and I was like, yo, PDF, let's do an event. And they were like, yes, let's do it. So I want to thank them for organizing it. And I hope, even though I'm standing up, I'd rather be sitting down. So I hope we can have a bit of a discussion on some of the things that I've seen and some of the things that I've learned in Pakistan. Now, the reason I want to talk about class, state, and politics in a different way, or the way I'm going to be talking about this is moving away from the headline. Right? I'm not going to be talking about the military. I'm not going to be talking about the Supreme Court, and I'm not going to be talking about politicians and how they fight each other. I'm not going to be talking about terrorism. I'm not talking about religious extremism, and I'm not going to be talking about Nawaz Sharif, Altaf Hussain, Zardari, or Imran Khan. And now you guys are going to be like, so what's there left to talk about? Exactly, that's the point. There's a lot going on in Pakistan. There's 200 million people in Pakistan, probably more, from all very different cultural backgrounds, very different places. They have very different experiences, and to just flatten all of that into some easy narratives is part of the problem. And that's part of what we want to try and get beyond. So I'm going to try and do that based on my experience mainly in a part of rural Pakistan, so moving away from the cities. Again, the majority of Pakistanis actually live in rural areas. They don't live in cities, even though there's a lot of people living in cities. The majority of Pakistanis actually live in these rural areas, and a lot of them have some kind of relationship to agriculture. About half of the working people in Pakistan have a relationship with agriculture. So my research site is this district. It's called Charsata, and it's in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, of course, is better known for things blowing up and blowing things up. But there's actually a lot more going on in KPK, as we call it. So Charsata is in northwestern Pakistan. It's very near to the border with Afghanistan, about an hour away. If you just scale those mountains. They're not really mountains, they're hills, but they look like mountains. And those mountains, of course, are the agencies. Those are the agencies where the Taliban, again, is well known. And north of Charsadda, there's Malakand Agency, Malakand Division, which, as some of you probably know, was taken over more or less by the Taliban a few years ago. So Charsadda is remarkably untouched by the Taliban. All around it, stuff's blowing up, but right there, I was safer than anywhere else in Pakistan, including Islamabad. So that's kind of something that just jars a lot of people. But a lot of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is actually pretty safe. Maybe not that safe, but safe enough. And this is within Charsadda. This is a map of Charsadda district, and it's the best map I could find. The only map I could find. The northern area is called Northern Hashtnagar. It's called Hashtnagar, and the southern part is just Charsadda. No one really cares about it. But this whole area is called Hashtnagar, and that northern part is called Northern Hashtnagar. It's a very fertile area because the Swat River runs through Charsadda and it meets up with the Kabul River. And there's all these canals. So it's very much like central Punjab in the sense that there's canals running through this land. And it's extremely fertile. This is a photograph of tobacco. And tobacco grows really tall. It grows like almost as tall as me. And you can hide in tobacco fields. So tobacco is the main cash crop, one of the main cash crops in Northern Hashtnagar. So there's a bunch of villages. I didn't do like a classical village study. I just ran around a whole bunch of villages interviewing a lot of people. Pretty much that entire area that's shaded in the north, that I've been to most of those villages and a lot of those areas. The population of Charsadda is about 1 million people, or it was 1 million people in 1998. I don't know what's happened since then because there hasn't been a census in Pakistan in the last 15 years. So probably there's 1.6 million or 2 million people in Charsadda, and in Northern Hashtnagar there's probably a few million people. Now, even though most people have a relationship with agriculture in Hashtnagar, they're not necessarily involved in farming directly. They're not necessarily peasants directly. A lot of them do all kinds of work, building stuff, going to other cities like Pindi, Lahore, Karachi, or they go to the Gulf to work. They might have their own small businesses, what we call petty bourgeois people. They might have cars, they might have that they drive, and all kinds of other stuff going on. So even though agriculture is important, and we'll get into this, other stuff is also important. It's really important to understand that. Now I want to talk about class, and the way that we usually talk about class often when we refer to it, it's like there's rich people, there's poor people, and then there's people in between. Some of those people in between are upper, and then some of those people in between are lower. So you basically have a four-class thing: rich people, poor people, and upper and lower middle classes, right? And that's just a kind of a stratification based on income. Now there's a problem with this. It doesn't really tell us anything about why some people are rich and why some people are poor. It doesn't really tell us anything about the relationship between the rich and the poor. It doesn't tell us about the relationship between the lower middle class and the upper middle class. So there's a different way of approaching class categories in political economy, in traditional political economy. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you or two examples of class categories, and I'll let you know a little bit about their stories. One of them is called the landless worker, right? Especially in agricultural societies, you have these landless workers. They don't have any land, they can't farm it, so they have to sell their labor in order to live. And this one guy, I was living in a village called Shapur. This one guy, his name was Visat, and I kept thinking his name was Visat, and he was like, no, it's Visat. Okay, I'm sorry. He was landless. He was really poor. He was probably the poorest person in the village. And what he did for work was he went to a bazaar nearby and he made pakori and chane for somebody else. He worked at somebody else's stall. And for that, he got paid 150 rupees a day. So that's $1.50, which is obviously very little. Most workers in Pakistan, most workers that I met would make anywhere from 200 to 300 rupees a day. In fact, what's really interesting, or maybe it's not interesting, it's really bad. This one worker I was supposed to meet, you have to take appointments from workers because they're really busy, right? So this guy I was supposed to meet couldn't come because he had a heat stroke, right? He was going to make 300 rupees that day. He had a heat stroke, he passed out, the doctor came, and he had to pay the doctor 500 rupees. So he, minus 200 rupees. Thankfully, it had nothing to do with me, it had to do with the sun and the heat stroke. But I couldn't meet with this guy. So anyway, Wasat was making 150 rupees a day, and he probably had a weekend. Now he was only 18 years old, and you could tell visibly that he was malnourished because he was about this short and this thin, right? He was really small, and his father had died some 8 years ago, so he had to take the burden of the home. He only studied up to the 4th grade, and he could only afford to fund his younger brother's education up to the 7th grade. So his younger brother then had to quit school as well, and he also joined him working for another 150 rupees a day. So total, they were making 300 rupees a day. Now, Prasad's mother sometimes went to work on other people's fields, right? And in Pashtun society, in Pashto society, it's considered really kind of not good for women to leave the household compound, and especially not good for women to work on other people's lands. There's a whole set of problems there, which we can talk about later. But the point is that within that kind of cultural habitus, the idea that you actually have to leave home to work means that you're in desperate strait. And so she would sometimes work on other people's fields, but mainly it was these two brothers who were doing the work. And very poor, a lot of problems. He just got married like a year ago, and the entire village had to pitch in to pay for his marriage. He couldn't pay for himself. He was poor. He didn't have a mobile phone. He didn't have a television. He didn't have anything except for a fan. And of course, like everybody else in the village, he stole electricity. Like everybody else in Pakistan, he stole electricity from, especially the rich in Pakistan steal a lot. So they had kunde, books, and they bring the electricity in. All he had was a fan, and he lived in a small two-home house. He couldn't even say, "Come to my place, and I'll give you something." Right? Which is also part of culture where you go to somebody and immediately they're going to say, "Come, sit with me, have a drink." Not like a drink, but like ruhabza, and because it's summer and they have ruhabza. And or some chai, and then they'll want you to stay for food, and you stay for food, and then they say, "You're spending the night with me, right?" And you're like, "No, you get night." But this happens. Literally, it happened hundreds of times to me. So he couldn't say that, and that did come from him. He was shy. So I interviewed him in the beginning of June, and at the end of June, as I was getting ready to leave, he died. Okay, how did he die? Dysentery. And dysentery is probably officially one of the stupidest things to die from. It's really easy to treat. It's extremely easy to treat. It means that you've got an infection in your intestinal tract. You get diarrhea. You lose a lot of water. But if you're treated within 10 days, you'll be fine. Most of the time, right? It's rare that people die from dysentery. I was there for 2.5 months. My immune system isn't the best immune system. I got sick a couple of times, but not that seriously. And there's reasons for that. I'm not malnourished, right? I'm not poor. And if I got sick, I could immediately go to a doctor. And I'm thinking that he didn't go to a doctor. In fact, as far as I know, he didn't go to a doctor. And probably the reason for that, and I heard this from a lot of working class people, a lot of proletarians, is that they couldn't afford healthcare, even free government healthcare. Think about that. If you can't afford free government healthcare, then there's a problem. And he couldn't, and he died from dysentery. Again, stupidest disease in the world to die from, one of them. But a lot of people in a lot of third world countries die from it. So treating it is not rocket science. Some people said, "Oh, he might have killed himself." And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if he did kill himself, because 300 rupees a day is 150 rupees a day is not enough. You can't deal with it. So this is a landless worker. Now, on the other side, let me introduce you to a guy who's very much like you and me. I'm not going to take his name, not that it matters. I'll call him ARK or ARK. That's his initials, ARK. He lives in a village called Amirabad. And Amirabad is actually named after his ancestors. So he lives in a village basically named after himself. Because you can tell what the A stands for in ARK. That's for Amir. Amirabad, seriously. And he's 54 years old, and even though he's only studied up to the 8th grade, he can speak English very well. And he made a point of showing me just exactly how good his English is. Right? After I conduct the whole 4-hour interview with Urdu, and he's like, "Now let me talk to you in English." Okay. His 2 sons went to school, private schools, went to good universities. One of them is 32 years old, works in a bank. Another is 30 years old. He works in a government institution. And so, probably most of us in this room would share a class position in Pakistan with this guy. In fact, we're probably richer than him, and I'll explain in a second. Many people will be richer than him, and I'll explain how. He has 70 acres of land. It might not sound like a lot, But in rural Pakistan, according to official statistics, even the top 3% by farm size in Pakistan. Wait, not even, sorry, not, did I say 70 acres? He owns 70 acres, but his own farm is 30 acres. That's his self-cultivation. I'll explain that in a second. But even if all he has is 30 acres, he comes within the top 3% of farm sizes in Pakistan, and within the top 1% of farm sizes in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So 70 acres doesn't sound like a lot when you think of feudal Baderas, have thousands of acres. You don't even need to go that far in Pakistan. All you need is 30 acres. So he farms about 30 acres of land. It's self-cultivation in the sense that he hires 10 to 15 workers to do that cultivation. That's called self-cultivation in the literature, and in legalese, I don't know why. So he pays them about 250 rupees a day, $2.50 a day to do this work. And they're not always on, but they're mostly on. His younger son supervises them. As for the 20 acres, another 20 acres, he rents it out on a sharecropping basis, called half and half. So him and the person who's renting it, the tenant, they're going to share expenses 50%, investment 50%. The tenant does all of the labor, and then you get back 50% of the profits. Okay. So what do you invest? You invest your land, and you invest half of the capital required, and that person invests half of the capital required and all of the labor, and then you get 50% of the profit off of that. Then another 20 acres is occupied by Kisani. Kisan, as far as I know, is not a word or it wasn't a word in Pashto, but it became a word because of the peasant movement in this area. This is why I actually went to this area, and I'm not going to talk about the peasant movement. We can talk about that in Q&A or discussion or whatever. But Kisani has come to mean, and you're occupying something by force. That's what Kisan in Urdu and Punjabi just means a farm. But in Pakhtunkhwa, it means you're occupying something by force, and you're occupying land by force. So 20 acres are occupied by Kisani, and they pay 10,000 rupees per acre, as opposed to the market rate, which would be about 40,000 rupees. Right? This is the thing about Kisani. That's the special thing about this area. Now, the thing about Kisani is, again, as I said, this guy was just like, listen, I wish that I didn't even have to self-cultivate my land, and I wouldn't be self-cultivating my land if it wasn't for Kisani. If it wasn't for the peasant movement, I'd just be chilling and getting 40,000 rupees per acre, and he has 70 of them, right? So he'd be making 2.8 million rupees per year just off of the fact that he owns land, nothing else. If it wasn't for the peasant movement, which forces him to then look after his land, and which forces him to do sharecropping in this way. And he's not a very efficient farmer. He's not a very effective, productive, capitalist farmer. He's just like, yo, listen, I don't want to do this, but I have to. So, and it's really difficult. I wish the government would, give us money. And which is true. That's another problem. He also has all these shops which he rents out, and factory spaces which he rents out, so he gets a good monthly income. And remember, all he wants to do is he wants to kick back and rent out his entire property. Now, is this guy the richest person in Pakistan? No. Right? In fact, if we go by stratification, you could say he's upper middle class in Pakistan. Right? He's not the richest amongst the richest. Some of you are probably richer than he is. And I'm probably richer than he is. On my TA sound, no, I'm not. Yeah, no, I'm not. But my family is probably doing just as well as his is, and he owns land. But within the context of Pakistan, this guy is a semi-feudal landlord, right? Anyway, you look at it, he's semi-feudal. He's like, people come to my hujra, I get all my tenants to come at night, and they just chill in my place. And so he has a cultural and a social thing that goes with it. And you wouldn't know that. If I said upper middle class, you're probably thinking of some guy in Gloria Jean, which is like Starbucks in Pakistan, drinking coffee, right? Which is what I did a lot when I was in the city. So this is when you think of upper middle class. You think of these urban, educated people. You're not thinking of the semi-feudal landlord, who, by the way, might as well be urban and educated. This guy, I had to catch him because he was going away to Murray. Murray is a hill resort. So he was going to Murray for Ramadan, so that you don't have to fast in the heat, unlike 99.9% of the population. Now, since I spoke about Wasat Health I think just to be balanced, we should talk about this guy's stuff. He was really healthy, in the Urdu sense of the word healthy, right? I could just tell that this guy's a diabetic and he has heart disease, and I could tell that his sons are going to be diabetic and heart disease. And I don't mean to say that to make fun, but I'm telling you that diabetes and heart disease is a disease that you can afford to have. You can afford to have diabetes. You cannot afford to have dysentery. That's class. And that's kind of what I mean by class conditioning opportunities, conditioning your concerns, what you think about, how you live. And the question is, do you have productive assets? Do you have land? Do you have capital? Do you have to sell your labor? Or can you hire your labor? These are complex questions. There's no straightforward way to break this stuff down. But this really is at the root of whether or not you're poor, or whether or not you're rich, or whether or not you're upper middle class or lower middle class. And we have to start thinking in these terms. And in between the landlords and the workers, you know, the classical agrarian class structure is set up like this. You have the landless worker who has no land. You have a poor peasant who has access to some land, but not enough land to live off of it. So he has to sell his labor. That's what makes him a poor peasant. Then you have a middle peasant who don't really hire much labor, and they don't sell their labor off farm either. Some of them, upper middle peasants, tend to hire more labor than small peasants. Everybody in rural Pakistan hires labor seasonally. You have to hire labor when you're cutting the crop. You have to hire labor when you're planting the crop sometimes. So it's just a question of, do you continuously, musalsil, do you hire workers or not? And middle peasants tend not to hire, nor do they tend to sell their labor. And but upper middle peasants sometimes get an edge on hiring. Now rich peasants hire labor. They use more hired labor than family labor. Then you have capitalist farmers, who are not only rich peasants, not only do they hire labor, but they also invest surpluses in agriculture and make profits off of agriculture. And then you have landlords, who just give a guy, I'm going to kick back and get 20,000 rupees off of a year of land. Sorry, 40,000 rupees off of an acre of land. So this is kind of a classical agrarian class structure. But the problem is that it's not just an agrarian economy. There's all kinds of other stuff going on. So people are actually straddling class positions. You know, the poor peasant is like a semi-worker, right? He has to do his land, and then he has to go work somewhere else so that he can make his home. He can just eat it. And so you can actually kind of see, based on their agrarian position, where people are going to end up. It's not exact. People do straddle all kinds of classes. Right? There's casual daily wage work. Like I just need to go out and find whatever work I can find today. And this is really precarious. You can't always find work. Sometimes, often you're not going to find work. It's going to be really difficult to find work. So you take what you can. You make about 200 rupees, 300 rupees per day. Then you have low-level salaried positions. And this is like amazing. Like, oh my God, this guy's a janitor. That's blowing my mind, right? That's an amazing job to have. Because you have a stable, permanent job. Nothing is more important in rural Pakistan than a stable, permanent job. And then you have migrant labor, people who are able to leave. It takes a lot of money to leave, in fact. Transportation is expensive. When you look at it as a percentage of, you know, if you're only making 200 rupees a day and then you need to spend 40 rupees coming and going to the next village, that can be really expensive. Right? That's a huge chunk of your daily wage is gone there. So migrant labor is extremely expensive. If you want a visa for Saudi Arabia, it costs you 300,000 or 400,000 rupees. Expensive. Then you have government clerks or professionals like lawyers, engineers, doctors. We can call these petty bourgeois positions, right? In the sense that you're kind of independent. You don't really depend on capital, and you don't really depend on wage labor. You're kind of just doing your thing. And people want these positions. They want, this is like the holy grail, right? You get a government job, it's like, damn, man, I got a government job. I'll speak about that in a second. But this is the way that people straddle. So you can be a middle peasant, and you can try sending your kids to school so that they become lawyers, doctors, or engineers. You can be a poor peasant, but you can, you know, just manage to bring together money to buy a visa and send somebody abroad, and then they send money back. So then you can use that money to send somebody else abroad, and it goes like that. So there's a lot of shifting. People are shifting class positions. You might be a shop owner, so you'd be petty bourgeois because you're a shop owner. You're doing your own thing, but then you get, you know, your business goes to crap, and then all of a sudden you find yourself being a poor peasant because all you had was 2 acres of land, 1 acre of land. So that kind of stuff happens. Now, an interesting thing that I noticed talking to people was about education, right? And It's this, that you have to be able to distinguish between private schools and government schools. Government schools are low quality and low in availability, especially government schools for girls, which prevents a lot of people from sending girls to school. It's not that, Pathans are like crazy, misogynistic, it's sexist. There's plenty of patriarchy, but there's plenty of misogyny. But people want to send their girls to school. Most of the time, they're not able to send their girls to school because of poverty or the inavailability of girls' schools. And they want them. They don't want their girls to be uneducated. Nor is the main problem the Taliban blowing up schools, at least not in this area. The main problem is poverty. The main problem is the lack of availability of schools. Even where the Taliban is blowing up schools, that's not the main problem, right? And when it comes to private schools, these are expensive. You have to have some position before you can even start sending your kid to school, never mind private school. So what I noticed was that a lot of working class people who are landless workers, either sent their kids to government schools or didn't send their kids to school at all. Then when you got to poor peasants, they were better able to send their kids to government school, but had a difficult time sending them to private school. When you got to middle peasants, that's when most of the kids started going to private school. Or you would have people making decisions. Which kid is going to go to private school and which kid is going to go to government school. And as you can imagine, boys go to private school and girls go to government school if you have that choice. If you can only educate some members of your family, you're going to pick boys over girls for obvious reasons. They're the ones who are going to go out and work. Right? It's a completely logical thing to do in this situation. Is it patriarchal? Yes. Is it sexist? Yes, but that's the structure, that's the conditions that people live in that makes it sexist and patriarchal. Right? That's something we have to remember. And then, of course, so middle peasants are able to send their kids to private school. And then upper middle peasants can send them on further schooling, right? University and stuff like that. So it's really this, and these are tendencies. I'm not saying that this is exactly, they all fall into these categories neatly. But this is something that I noticed when I was speaking to, dozens of people. I started noticing this pattern. And that was really interesting. So I want to make a point about certain famous people who become famous because the Taliban shoots them in the head. They get to go to private school, right? And then if you make it about that, if you make it about the Taliban, you forget that the vast majority of girls in Pakistan are simply not going to school. It has nothing to do with the Taliban. 99, I can't say 99, but I showed you a map of Pakistan. The vast majority of those girls aren't being attacked by the Taliban, and they can't go to school. Never mind girls, most boys can't go to school. So then if you blame the lack of education on the Taliban, and if your father owns a private school, that means he's rich within the terms of the rural economy. If your father owns a private school and he's able to send you to that private school, he's making a lot of money off of people. He's exploiting people. And in what sense are you exploiting people? There's a huge crisis of jobs in rural Pakistan and a huge crisis of livelihood. And the reason for that is because agriculture simply isn't as profitable now as maybe it would have been. You just can't live off the land. It just doesn't happen. So as I said, everybody's straddling these class positions. Everybody's looking for different jobs to get, especially the government jobs, right? I know one thing a lot of people say, and you can leave it like a mantra, it's like education will solve all the problems. And I can't tell you how many unemployed, educated, well-educated young men I met. I have to admit I didn't meet any women or girls for the 2.5 months that I was there. I mean, if you're thinking that's pretty much your situation. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that you have all these educated youth, all these educated young men who simply have no jobs, and they're frustrated, they're pissed off. A lot of these educated young men, in fact, form a kind of a reserve army of private school teachers, right? You teach at a private school for 8,000 rupees to 10,000 rupees a month. That's really bad. If you work at 300 rupees per day, you can probably make 9,000 rupees a month, right? So think about that. If you're working like a manual labor job, well, you're probably not going to make 9,000 rupees a month. You're probably going to make about 7,500 to 8,000 rupees. So these well-educated private school teachers are making 8,000 rupees a month, 10,000 rupees a month, and they get the owners of these private schools are making killings, like they're making a killing off of private schools. I went to one of these guys' house and he was like, I'm killing. All right, he was killing. He had a really nice house. So you have to understand that people are being exploited even in private schools. Right? Private schools are exploited in Pakistan. This isn't something that's like a magical, la la la, all these girls frolicking in gardens of flowers. These are exploitative conditions. They're not necessarily very good conditions to be working in, or to be studying in for that matter. But they're much better than government schools. So you have to imagine how bad government schools are. So anyway, there's a crisis of education in Pakistan. There's a crisis of agriculture in Pakistan. If the government invested in agriculture, people would be able to. These peasants in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa are like crazy, technical and innovative, and they'll do stuff, but they just don't have the money. They can't afford to invest in agriculture. They can't afford basic things like fertilizer, pesticides. Never mind the land. If they rent it from a landlord who's charging them 40,000 rupees an acre, you can't afford fertilizer, you can't afford pesticides, you can't afford hybrid seeds, which come from multinational companies. You need government support, but the government's not supporting them. So there's an agricultural crisis, which means people want jobs. People don't see a future in agriculture. There are no jobs. So what do? This is the problem in Pakistan. This is the problem in virtually every third world country, is the absence of good jobs. So what ends up happening and how this relates to class is interesting, because getting a government job in Pakistan is like in rural Pakistan, it's like the holy grail. It's like, this is it, right? I just read a book. It's called How to Get Rich in Rising Asia, which is neither here nor there. But so I was just like, how to get a government job in Rising Asia. There's basically two ways. You either pay for it, you pay for a government job after you apply for it, right? After you get cleared and it's like, yeah, I passed all the tests, and it's like, now we need the money so that you can get a government job. And it's not like an official fee. This is corruption that I'm talking about, right? So like a janitorial position, a class 4 is like the lowest level of a government job that you can get. People were like, it would cost us 80,000 rupees lump sum payment, or 100,000 rupees, or 120,000 rupees. Whatever bureaucrat was in charge of getting us that job would say, we have the money. No. Okay, well, sorry, you don't get the job. And as you go up in the government pay scale, you have to start paying more and more money, like 500,000 rupees, 700,000 rupees for a job, for a government job. And that's because it's a scarce commodity. It's a very scarce commodity, right? Now, the other way that you can get a government job is political connections. So, and the reason for that is because the member of provincial assembly, the MPA, has the authority to appoint class 4 jobs, the lowest level. Right? So these are like chokidars or watchmen in schools, janitors, that kind of a job. And I don't know how many come up. It's just a matter of how many come up, right? So they look to create jobs. That's why you want to create jobs, is so that you can make people dependent on you, not so that you want them to get jobs. They look to create jobs. They look to make jobs. But let's say you're able to create 50 class 4 jobs per year, and you do that for 5 years. You're able to give out 250 jobs. I think that's an overestimate based on just what I was speaking to people about. It's an overestimate. Probably 50 jobs in 5 years is more accurate. I don't know. I can't say for sure. But the point is, even if you have 250 jobs in 5 years, there's a glut. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of people looking for jobs. Thousands for crappy jobs. They're not looking for great jobs. They just want to be chokidars. So what you want to do is make political connections with MPAs or MNAs, members of National Assembly. They're able to give better jobs, and especially if they can link into the military, into police, and get your jobs from this kind of stuff. And you want permanent, stable jobs. That's what everybody wants. Government job is like it. All of these overeducated, unemployed youth that I was telling you about, I wanted a research assistant, right? So I'm like, yo, there's a glut, man. I'm like, the buyer's market. And I couldn't. It was really hard to find a research assistant. Why? Because they're all studying. They're like, no, we got to pass these government exams so we can get these government jobs. I was like, yo, I'm going to pay you like a crazy amount of money. You've never seen this much money in 1 month. They're like, no, long-term interests, right? They're really thinking in terms of long-term interests. They want to pass these exams, get a CSS, like a civil service position, or provincial service position. So again, are the thing. So I told you about private school teachers, right? They're going to get paid 8,000 and 10,000 rupees to do their job. If you get a government job as a teacher, as say a senior English teacher, you can make 35,000 rupees, 40,000 rupees. So you're making 4 times as much, 3 times as much if you get a government job. And then you get benefits, you get vacation, you get retirement, you get a pension, all of these things. People want this. People need this. But there's like no factories, there's no corporations, there's no way to get private employment. So this is it. This is pretty much your only option. Or you can try to start a business or something, which is what a lot of people do. So now you want to cultivate relationships with politicians, but how do you do that? And who gets to do that? Right? So now if we flip the picture a bit and we think in terms of a politician like an MPA, and let's just say I'm an MPA who has a good transportation business. You know, my cousins are into the tobacco business; they sell tobacco, and you know, I have a lot of land. You know, I've got Larietas, you know, Larietas, like transportation hubs. So I'm making a lot of money. I'm rolling in cash, right? And I'm going to spend a lot of that cash because it's going to cost me a lot of money to run for election. You know, just a normal. This is democracy, by the way. You know, you go and you apply. You need like 40,000 rupees in the bank just to be able to apply for a position, to be a candidate or something like that. But the point is, not everybody can run. I just told you, 40,000 rupees is pretty much what you're, you know, making in 5 months. You're not going to be able to run for a position. So, and there's a lot of expenses, of course, in elections. You have to advertise. You have to pay for people's gas when they drive their cars. You have to hire consultants, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Expensive. You spend millions of rupees, even tens of millions of rupees, just on an MPA position. So you have to be rich, right? And as I said, transportation business, landlord, basically it's capitalists and very highly paid salaried professionals or landlords who are able to run for these positions. Or you have to be backed by these people, right? You could be a rich peasant, you could be a well-educated person and say, yeah, I'm going to run for this, but you need somebody who's going to bankroll your expenses. And it's an investment, right? Politics is an investment because you're going to make a lot more money off of that. You're not running because, you know, you want to serve the people. You know, you're not a revolutionary or something. You're a politician, or you're a businessman. Most of them are men. So you're going to spend a lot of money on this, and what you're going to want is you want these political mobilizers. You want people who are going to be able to run through the countryside and collect votes for you, because it's spread out, right? Settlements are spread out. You're not going to go everywhere. A lot of politicians I saw, they practically go everywhere. But what you can't do as a politician is go to everybody's, you know, drawing room, sit down with them and say, okay, let's bargain. What do you want for the votes of your family? What do you want from the votes of your extended kinship network? Stuff like that, right? So you have these political mobilizers who go around and do campaigning. And I went with them. I was just like, for a week, I just drove around as they spoke to people in Pashto and were like, okay, this guy's pissed off at the candidate because he did this. This guy's ticked off at our elder because he did this. So we have to, you know, settle them and say, you know, we'll do this for you, we'll do this, we'll get you this, we'll get you that. We'll line your streets, we'll line your canals. That's how politicking is done. And in order to be able to do that, you need transportation. You need to be able to get around. And you need to be able to take time off whatever it is you do for a livelihood. Right? So now if you're a worker and you're looking for work every day, you can't be a political mobilizer. If you're a poor peasant, you can't be a political mobilizer. But if you're a middle peasant, then the possibilities start opening up. If you're a rich peasant, possibilities start opening up. Then you can just be like, okay, I'm going to get my family to take care of this for, you know, these 2, 3, 4 weeks and do campaigning. I'm going to use my car, which I own because I'm a taxi driver, and I'm going to do campaigning with that. I'm going to use the money that my son sent me from Saudi Arabia and use that for my expenses for this month rather than something else. So I'm going to, you know, make some sacrifices, but I can afford to make those sacrifices, and I can afford to make those sacrifices because of my class position. That's important because you can afford to make those sacrifices. And at least this is what I saw. Maybe it's not the way it works everywhere in Pakistan. But where I saw it was a lot of these political mobilizers were relatively well-to-do. They were middle peasants. Some of them were traders, so they were market traders. Some of them were shop owners. So kind of petty bourgeois, small capitalists, and upper middle peasants are the ones who are doing this kind of political mobilization for the potential MPA. And so you want to reward these people, right? These are loyal people who went out and did this for you. Actually, a lot of them aren't even loyal. They don't give a crap about you or your party program or your party politics. Like socialism, is that really in your party platform? Nobody cares, right? They just want jobs. Okay, literally, like this is what these political mobilizers said to me. They're like, "You speak to the MPA and get a job." I'm like, no, I can't. But they were joking with me. I'm not sure if they were joking with me. because a lot of, just before I left, a lot of people were like, can you speak to this guy and get his job? And I was just like, no, not really. But I could, technically I could, because I have that kind of social capital that a lot of people don't. So these political mobilizers, one of them straight up said to me, listen, the reason I'm mobilizing both for this guy is because he agreed to give me 2 jobs, and he agreed to give me this much spending. Another guy who was running for another party, who was mobilizing for another party, straight up, he said, yes, we made an alliance with this party so that we could get 1/4 of the jobs and 10% of all the funds that he gets as an MPA. So this is, it's not even like he was hiding it or anything. He was like, straight up, this is what we're doing. This is what political mobilizers are for. And you make that alliance, or you're in that party, so that when those jobs come up, the MPA is going to say, who was loyal to me? Who did this mobilization for me? Who is in my party? And those jobs are distributed through the party structure, or through an alliance structure, right? If a small party makes an alliance with a large party. This is what's happening in this area. It's just, that's how jobs are getting distributed. And if not jobs directly, right? A lot of these middle peasants would have friends, so they would have requests. We want to get this guy a transfer. We want to get this guy a promotion. And you call up the MPA and you say, can you get this guy a promotion? Can you get this guy a transfer? And they say, because he's your friend, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try and do it. So this is the kind of exchange relationship that's happening in politics. This is what politics is about. And just to stress that again, or to talk about that, we can talk about gatekeepers, right? A lot of these political mobilizers are also what we can call gatekeepers. If you're poor, and let's say you get arrested, and you have to go to the Thana, you have to go to the police station, you're going to ask a gatekeeper to come with you, so that he can advocate on your behalf in jail. He can call the MPA and say, our guy got arrested, tell the police officer to go easy on him. And if you think this is just like rural politics, no, this is exactly what I saw in upper class Islamabad. Some guy got arrested, some capitalist got arrested, and then all of his son was like, oh, if you get a lawyer, and his son's friends were like, let's call up all the DIGs and SFPs or whatever that we know to call this Thana, this police station, in like upper class Islamabad and ask them to go easy on it. So this happens in rural areas. Imagine if you're if you're a capitalist in Islamabad and you're scared of being arrested. Imagine what it's like for a poor peasant or a middle peasant in rural type of Pakhtunkhwa to get arrested for whatever reason, right? So you want a gatekeeper who can help you access the state. Or if you want to go to a Patwari to get your land transferred, you need a gatekeeper to access the state. And so these gatekeepers are your connection to the MPA. They're your connection to the state. And these gatekeepers are often political mobilizers. They can mobilize vote banks. And that's why you have these people here. So if you're a working class person, or if you're a poor peasant, you're less likely to have political approach with a gatekeeper than if you're a middle peasant or a rich peasant. In fact, a lot of upper middle peasants and rich peasants don't even need gatekeepers. They directly have the phone number of the MPA. I'll tell you a story. Once I went to this village to do an interview, and I was talking to some people who I could tell were upper middle peasants, and they were like, "Yo, we don't need this gatekeeper, right? Because we have." And he showed me a cell phone. He's like, "Because I called the MPA 2 days ago at 9:43 p.m. and he picked up my phone." And I was like, "Okay." So I was like, "What's his number, by the way?" So I got his number, and my research assistant was with me, and he just heard it, right? He didn't see it. He just heard it. So then a couple of days later, I'm interviewing a poor peasant. He's like poor, and he's complaining. He's like, "I'm poor. I don't have the political approach, man." I kept hammering him about it. But couldn't you get an approach? Couldn't you ask somebody to do it for you? Like, I could ask somebody to do it for me, but they don't have a political approach either. I don't have a political approach. What am I supposed to do? So I'm like, well, here's the MPA's phone number. And he's like, oh. And I was about to tell him the MPA's phone number. It was my research assistant who had memorized it after hearing it just once. And he told him the phone number. And my research assistant was a really cool guy. He's the kind of guy who wouldn't call. He wouldn't ask for favors, right? But he had it memorized. My research assistant was a working class person. He was poor, right? So you have to, like, this is what's going on in rural areas. This is the problem of political approach. Working class people and poor peasants have a much harder time, unless they happen to be related to someone directly, or two degrees of separation. They have a much harder time having political approach, even to gatekeepers. Never mind the MPA himself. And the poor peasant was like, oh yeah, all right, maybe I'll call him up sometime. They go for it, man. But after I leave. So So this is the kind of thing that's happening. And then now we can talk about the state and corruption a bit. I know a lot of people have, there's this discourse, Nonviolence discourse. Institutions have been politicized. Institutions are politicized. That's what explains corruption. That's what explains all this, stuff going to hell. And what I've said so far kind of gives evidence for that narrative of the politicization of institutions. But what I'm going to try and tell you right now is that it really doesn't matter. Even if the military is in power, this corruption is still going on. This kind of connections, who is the gatekeeper? It's just that the gatekeeper's changed. Somebody else is now gatekeeper, right? Right now, you have to have the ear of the MPA, but when the military is in power, you need to have the ear of a major, right? And this MPA who just got elected, one of his cousins is a major in the army. One of his other cousins is a DIG in the police force. So if the military comes to power, this guy's still going to have the influence that he has right now because his cousin is a major. What's happening here is that corruption is so ingrained into the state that it doesn't matter if it's the military, it doesn't matter if it's civilian politicians. What happens then is they're just fighting over who gets to do the corruption. That's what the fight about is. Does the military and bureaucracy direct the corruption, or is it these elected politicians who direct the corruption? It's like democratic corruption. That's it. That's the difference. And people are still getting screwed either way. Removing politicians doesn't remove corruption. That's really important. It just redirects it. So I'm going to give you an anecdote. I was talking to this contractor, a former contractor. He's like, I quit contracting because I just couldn't handle it anymore. Not because it wasn't making me rich. It was making me rich, and I explained why it was making me rich. But because he just didn't like it. It didn't sit well with his conscience. Now I don't know whether to believe him or not. But he was a comrade, so I was like, okay, cool, I'll believe him. But he told me this is the breakdown. The graph that you see up there, this is the breakdown. Okay, from top to bottom. There's a government contract comes up. Let's build a road. Okay. 16% is fixed. It goes to the executive engineer, XEN. 16% is fixed. It's just like that's the cost of doing business. 2 to 3% is a gift that you nevertheless, on top of the 16%, you have to give a 2 to 3% gift to the XEN or to the chief engineer or to some official or the other. Change the tires on their cars or whatever. Get them nice rims, whatever, that kind of stuff. That's the example he gave me, is get the rims and nice tires. The XEN will split that. He'll split that between the chief engineer, between his subordinates, between the engineers on the ground. But 16% is what goes to the XEN. Then 6% is tax. Okay. 10 to 15% goes to other contractors because you're bidding for a contract, right? So you give 10 to 15% to the other contractors. You say, raise your prices so that my bid wins. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. I'm going to butter your toast if you butter mine. That's what's going on. 15 to 20% is profit, is the red stuff, and then 40% on a good day will get spent on the project itself. That's the government contract. That's a state contract. And this is from one contractor is what I heard. I heard very similar things from another contractor. Then there was this other contractor who was like, I've never engaged in corruption. I was like, I'm sure you have, right? That's just what makes the system go. That's just what the state does. It's just so deeply corrupt. And the reason for that is because the state itself is a vehicle for accumulation, right? The state itself is how you're going to make money. There's no factories. Nobody's investing in factories. Nobody's investing in agriculture. What are you going to do? You're going to rip people off for the money. It's a source of exploiting people. So, in my opinion, we can call this bureaucratic capitalism, right? In the sense that the state is a vehicle of accumulation. And who are these bureaucratic capitalists? They're land revenue officials like tehsildars, patwadis, they're executive engineers, chief engineers. These guys are they're like class 5. XEN is a class 5 job, which is just above class 4 or something. And these people are buying like crazy land. They've got like pajeros and driving around like verderos and all of that stuff, right? You become a mini verdera because you're an XEN. You're supposed to be a salaried employee. These patwadis were like that's a class 5 nobody job. They're like they got like Toyotas and they got like all kinds of stuff going. They got mad billions of rupees from being like a low government employee. Something's not working there. It has nothing to do with the politicization of institutions. It has nothing to do with whether or not politics is, whether or not it's a corrupt politician or a corrupt major or a corrupt bureaucrat. It's so deeply into the system. Now I want to wrap up. I've taken so much of your time. fascinating and kind of deep. But this raises questions about the state. There's a debate in development economics, in a lot of, not just development economics, but you'll hear it as an activist or amongst activists, among policymakers, which is this kind of free markets versus the state. You know, oh, free markets, they're just gonna like solve everything, and then other people will be like, no, free markets ruin everything. You know, the state needs to intervene in the economy. The state needs to industrialize. The state needs to manage healthcare. The state needs to manage education. Blah blah blah. Blah. And I think that's asking the wrong question. States versus markets is the wrong question because it's never been states versus markets. The state is always managing markets, whether they're freer or whether they're more restricted and there's more regulations. It's always the state regulating the market. The real question is, what is the class character of the state? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves. And this is a normative point that I'm making. So the thing is, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, whose interest does this state serve? Can you work within the state where bureaucratic capitalists, landlords, they're the ones who are exercising leadership. They're the ones who are directing the state. Middle peasants are trying to make their way into the state. They're trying to get those very scarce jobs, but they're having a really hard time doing that. And then poor peasants and the working class, which is the majority of Pakistanis, simply have very little access to the state. And you want to use that state to do what? To build another hospital, which isn't going to be open anyway, to build another school, which the teachers don't go to class, never mind the students. The question, and this really got focused for me, I went to Nepal for a month in between Pakistan, I was like, why not? And I was chilling with some revolutionaries, and they were talking about, listen, we need to understand the class character of the state. Can you use this state to do what you want to do, or do you have to replace this state with a state that's led by working classes, by peasants, by women, by minorities? That's the question that they're asking. So that's the question I think that we also have to ask, is it's not a simple matter of asking the state to do something, but asking about the class character of the state until, of course, we get rid of the state itself, which is a different discussion. So on that note, I'd like to conclude. Thank you for paying attention, especially if you're fasting. I can only imagine how hard that must have been. There's a lot of stuff that I abstracted from. So there's a lot of stuff, like tons of stuff that I didn't tell you, right? That's why I got to write a dissertation on it. And hopefully that's going to happen. So I just want to note, though, that it's important to note that I abstracted away from a lot of actual details so that I could give you this story. And that's